Hey, and welcome to episode 28 of Think Like a Hacker. We've got a jam-packed news episode for you this week. We've got a crazy Zoom vulnerability that we're covering. Turns out that Zoom creates a web server that runs on your local host that's able to do all sorts of interesting things. And we looked away for a moment, and WP Engine went ahead and acquired Flywheel. So we're covering that story with a bunch of others. Get ready for an awesome episode. All right, Kathy, you're back in Phoenix now?
Back in Phoenix, yes.
Yeah, and I guess you went to WordCamp EU in Berlin, and we hung out over there and did a couple of news episodes from there, and then straight to, was it Kansas City?
Straight to Kansas City, yeah. Visited with some WordPress folks there, and then I went to California, and California was so excited to see me, it shook up a little bit. That was fun.
Right. Yeah, I guess it shook up twice. The second one, was it a 7.2?
Yeah, I think 7.2 or 7.1. It was definitely one of the largest earthquakes in Southern California in quite a while.
Wow, yeah. Well, I hope they're done with that and we don't have any more. So this Zoom vulnerability is pretty crazy.
It is.
So this vulnerability was reported on Medium by a blogger on Medium, Jonathan Leitcher. And Jonathan, I'm probably completely butchering your name, so I apologize about that. But the vulnerability allows any website to forcibly join a user to a Zoom call with their video camera activated without the user's permission. And I tested this on the site. They have a proof of concept, so in a sandbox, I tested it, and it works like this. You click a link, you're dropped into a Zoom conference with your camera on. That's it. It's unbelievable. It's like, often vulnerabilities will be subtle, they'll be theoretical. It's like, it's a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Under certain conditions, an attacker can inject a payload into your website, and then if you do such and such, you'll be compromised. No. This vulnerability allows someone to take a Zoom link, put it on a website, and if you click the link, you can join a conference. But I think, and I haven't verified this, but I think that there's a way for you to simply visit a site and be added to a conference, and there may be a way to actually obscure the fact that you have been added to a conference. Kathy, I haven't tested this, but I think that there might be a way to basically launch a window that is a pop under, and you're kind of in the conference, and the only way that you would know is if you've got a little light on your webcam. The light would kind of glow, but if you don't notice that, you don't know that you're being filmed right now, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, JavaScript could definitely do something like that. So I'm curious, I didn't click the link. What happened when you clicked this link?
It was pretty funny. So I immediately I went to a website, as you would expect, but the entire web page was a Zoom conference. My camera was automatically turned on, and I was in the conference. Everyone could see me, and presumably they could hear me as well. And I could see them. And there was probably like 8 people in the conference, and we were all laughing our asses off because the story is just broken. And so these are all security researchers or people that are industry insiders and so on that have all they're kind of verifying the proof of concept that this guy has, and we're all looking at each other. It's kind of a unique experience in security research to sort of experience that tangible an effect of the whole thing, and people are dropping off very quickly. So,
was it a Zoom conference embedded in the actual browser, or did it launch Zoom?
So, if I recall correctly, because I only did it once, I clicked the link, I saw the Zoom overlay, the application started initializing, and then I think it was inside the browser window, but it did make an indication that Zoom was doing something.
Okay.
So the website simply has to embed some code, and when visiting the site, you'll be added to a call with your video enabled. You don't receive a prompt or anything like that. We tested this, as I mentioned, using the link provided, and verified that it actually works. The vulnerability could allow an attacker to potentially drop you into a call and have the window be obscured. But like I said, the Zoom overlay appeared briefly for me. Your mileage may vary, so I don't know how much it's going to be disclosed that you're initiating a call. If you've ever installed the Zoom client, what the researcher says here is that even if you've uninstalled the Zoom client, you still have a localhost web server on your machine, and that web server he's discovered has the ability to reinstall the Zoom client. And it doesn't require any interaction on your behalf besides visiting a web page. Now, the way that Zoom uses this web server, it's running on localhost and it's running on a high numbered port. It's port 19421. And the way it works is that if you visit a website, there'll be a URL on the page that points to localhost and that port number, and it has the ability to essentially send instructions to that web server by making image-like requests to that server, and it bypasses CORS by doing that, which is a security mechanism that protects sites from loading content from places that they shouldn't load content. And one of the things that the website that you're visiting can instruct that server to do is to reinstall the Zoom client, which is pretty nuts. And the researcher mentions in his research that he was really hoping to find an RCE, or a remote code execution vulnerability, because when you see an application that installs a web server that's quietly running on your machine, the first thing you think is, wow, if they're doing something that silly, maybe they've written their application badly and there's a way for me to go in and do a buffer overflow or something like that creates a remote code execution condition. He wasn't able to verify that though, but he was able to discover that there's a way to drop someone into a conference as soon as they visit a page with their camera enabled. And he details that in the research, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes. So pretty crazy story here. And then Kathy, I guess the PR department over at Zoom were just sort of making noises with their keyboard and their mouth that didn't really make much sense.
Yeah, so PSA, if you get a security researcher telling you that there's a security problem, send them to the security department. Hopefully your company has one, and leave the PR people to, pretty pictures on Twitter, I suppose. Yeah. This was fairly serious, and he gave them 90 days, and so it took a couple of weeks to put this proof of concept and everything together, apparently. So it was like 90 days and 2 weeks that they had in order to fix this. And he updated this yesterday, saying update on June 7th, that they regressed the fix that they originally implemented, which was kind of just Band-Aids and toothpicks type of fix, and allowed the vulnerability to be exploited again. So it's definitely a problem. This is technically a 0-day. It can be exploited, as Mark experienced right now. There are some tips. If you go to our site, we'll have links in the show notes. And there are some tips on there of things that you can do to shut down the web server. And if you are required to use Zoom, if your company requires or your job requires that you have to use Zoom, there are some settings that you can set in Zoom to prevent your video from being activated, even though you are likely going to be still dumped into a meeting. It won't activate your video immediately. So there are some Band-Aids you can put on yourself, but Zoom definitely should. I think they're going to have a huge wake-up call that their users, they're thinking about 4 million people, just guessing based on the fact that they had 40 million users in 2015, and about 10% are likely Mac users, so they're guessing about 4 million people may be vulnerable to this.
Right.
So that's a lot of people.
Yeah, and to be clear, this affects the Mac client, and so it's the Mac client for Zoom that we're talking about. And if you happen to be listening to this and you're in front of your Mac right now, if you are running the web server, you can just do an lsof, or list open files -i, and then colon, and then the port number this runs on is 19421, and hit enter, and you get the PID of the process, and then just do a kill -9, and then the process number, and that'll kill the process, and then you can delete the .zoomus directory in your home directory, and that'll remove the web server application files, and that'll that'll get rid of this web server. So if you've uninstalled the Zoom client, but you still have the web server running, and the web server, of course, has the ability to reinstall Zoom, that's how you get rid of the web server permanently. So WP Engine acquiring Flywheel. That was a little bit of a surprise. So what do you think about that, Kathy?
Yeah, I didn't expect this, but I know plenty of our agency customers that we work with are very happy with these two hosting providers, but a little sort of tenuous, no excitement necessarily in people that I've talked to in terms of what they're expecting from this. Now they had this was announced in TechCrunch on June 24th, so it looks like WP Engine, they're obviously a much larger company, right, Mark? And Flywheel smaller, and I think a lot of people were happier in the small, they didn't want, the big company to come take their small hosting provider type of thing. And I with Flywheel's customers, they're really happy with the service, and obviously WP Engine too, but it's always just a little spooky when a big company comes and buys your favorite hosting provider, I suppose.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's go over the numbers first, and then we'll chat some inside baseball on the hosting landscape. So
let's do it.
So basically, WP Engine's revenue is currently about $132 million a year, and they just passed 100,000 customers. Flywheel is at 18 million a year, and they are at somewhere between 20,000 and 28,000 customers. The WP Engine team size, I think that they're at about 800 people, and Flywheel's team size is over 200 people, and together they're about 1,000. Actually, it says the combined company is 900 employees, and the reason my arithmetic seems off here is because we're getting this from multiple sources. So these are approximate numbers, but the combined company is 900 employees globally. Flywheel's team size is 200 people, and I guess WP Engine makes up the balance. So that's kind of the one. Some of the data that we have there. Together, Flywheel and WP Engine now have 120,000 customers. So that's the one source that I heard is, so we heard three sources actually. The one was WP Engine just passed 100,000 customers. I heard Flywheel has 28,000 customers, and then I think on the press release they said that Flywheel and WP Engine now have 120,000 customers. So they might have just rounded that down. Mm-hmm. So I think Flywheel's 28,000, WP Engine is 100,000. And WP Engine is, I think the founders, I don't know this for a fact, but they've raised multiple rounds. Private equity is an investor now in WP Engine. I think the founders probably cashed out. So they've raised about, Kathy, is this 250 million so far that WP Engine has raised?
Yeah, it looks that way.
Okay, and then I think the word on the street was that they raised a small round to finance this deal.
And it looks like TechCrunch was speculating, or maybe there was a quote from WP Engine management that they're looking to go public eventually. Did you see that?
Yeah, no, so I think Heather is the CEO, if I'm not mistaken, and her stated goal is to take WP Engine public. And that makes sense. The investors want an exit, and I don't know that an acquisition of an organization that size is on the cards. I can't think of a very obvious fit, but I guess that's possible. But an obvious sort of exit strategy for the investors there would be to take the company public. All right, so now the inside baseball part of it, and I better apologize to some folks that I'm friends with that I might mention in my conversation here. But I guess from what I've heard, well, maybe I won't mention any specific names, but from what I heard, a friend was developing dev tools at WP Engine, or tools for developers to use who are using their services. Mm-hmm. And they were doing that pretty enthusiastically. And my understanding is that WP Engine is kind of neck on neck with Liquid Web in terms of competition. Would you say that's fair, Kathy?
I know that both companies are very much loved by their customers.
Okay, but they're competitors, right?
Yeah, oh, totally competitors.
That's just
in terms
really what I was
of the
asking.
customers that, I mean, they're going after sort of the agency or people who need, rapid development cycle workflows, and those are their customer bases rather than, an independent, mom and pop shop that just needs their website.
Yeah. And so, they're targeting the same customers, trying to differentiate themselves from each other. Their price points are quite similar. I think WP Engine starts at about $35 a month, and Liquid Web's about the same. Don't quote me on that. But and then they've obviously got tiered packages. But so Liquid Web, I heard they have some great dev tools, and WP Engine was kind of doing the same thing. And Flywheel was really known for local by Flywheel, right, Kathy?
Yeah, oh, totally. People love local by Flywheel.
And I haven't used that. I don't know if you've used it, but I suspect you've spoken to people who have. Do you know what that does?
I haven't used it, but it's apparently just like a local dev environment that then workflows into the production site. So, and it's really slick. So I haven't used it myself. I just, talk to a lot of people and they really rave about it.
Yeah. And so I think what's happened here is that it's a little bit of an intellectual property acquisition, in terms of getting local by Flywheel as part of this deal. It's a talent acquisition. That's a team of 200 people that's providing a great service to their customers, and that team is integrated. Now, to hire 200 people into a fast-growing company is no simple task. It's a lot of work. You're going to have to go out there and compete for that talent in a very competitive tech landscape. And so, they get local by Flywheel. They get the 200 folks that are part of the Flywheel team. They get the customers and the cash flow and the market share, which is, I guess Flywheel's price point was a little lower than WP Engine, right?
They're less expensive.
Okay, but pretty close. They weren't sort of. It's not like $5 a month hosting. It was like $20 a month or something like that, versus 35. So very similar target market. So they get access to that market share as well. It feels like the deal really makes sense. I could probably speculate about how much the deal was worth, but I'm not gonna do that. But just to reiterate, we're friends with some folks at WP Engine, friends with the team at Liquid Web. In fact, we aired an interview last week that I did with Carol Wheeler, the Chief Operating Officer of Liquid Web, which is awesome. And then I don't think I know anyone at Flywheel. Kathy, do you know anyone over there?
Yeah, we've had some good times with some people from Flywheel at various WordCamps. So we have some friends over there, and we've also talked to a number of their customer service people, and they're really customer focused, service focused, and very well loved. From what I've heard, their locals not going to go, the people at Flywheel who are hosting at Flywheel aren't going to then now have to adopt all of WP Engine's technologies. I've seen some statements put out by folks at Flywheel that you're still going to have the great service and your flows are going to all be the same, so it shouldn't affect people too much.
Yeah, no, great. Well, so I think the point is that there's a lot of, the industry's pretty close. We all like each other very much. I think that from our side, we definitely wish the Flywheel team the best in terms of integrating into WP Engine, and it'll be interesting to see. And I think ultimately this is probably going to be good for the customer because there's still a lot of competition in the space. And that's very healthy, and you can tell, in the way that we're describing the relationship between the various sort of market participants in this sector. They're kind of motivating each other to innovate and serve their customers better. And this doesn't feel like a negative thing where now you have this single giant conglomerate that has a monopoly. It's actually just one of multiple players that has just gotten stronger. And congratulations to both teams, and we wish them the best. Moving forward, or moving on in our news, cPanel. Wow, they got a lot of heat on this pricing change. Did you hear about that?
Yes, I did. So they made an announcement on it appears maybe June 27th. Apparently my brain is still in Berlin. But they made an announcement that they were changing their pricing structure, and instead of being able to have services and pricing around a VPS or dedicated license with unlimited cPanel accounts, they decided that because of improvements in hardware, you could use one cPanel license with a lot more sites because hardware is improving. And so they decided to sort of cap that licensing to 100 accounts, which if you are a small hosting provider with tight margins, that can be kind of painful, I would imagine. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think so, and I saw that. You know, I saw someone mentioning DDoS or something like that on cPanel, and and the link was actually to a forum post, and I couldn't verify that anyone was actually DDoSing cPanel. But what I did discover was a forum that had 19 pages of posts, and each of the pages had something like 200 actual posts, and it was just over a period of like 2 days, and it was mostly really small operators, so really small hosting companies, you know, 1 to 3 people companies, where, you know, they were just complaining about how this is absolutely going to kill their business. And I think what it is here is the cPanel have created a way to power someone to create a hosting provider, and they can kind of spin up their hosting provider very easily and serve their customers and so on. And you know, there's just a lot of very small hosting providers across the globe, and they're running at very thin margins, like a razor thin margins. And so this increases their costs, and it could, I mean, it basically forces them to raise prices. And in some cases, if a price rise is not feasible because that host is competing directly with someone else and the someone else is not affected by the cPanel change, then they're out of business because they're going to lose all their business to that competitor. So, you know, there's a lot of frustration around this. Nothing definitive in terms of everyone going over to some other company. But I guess one of the things we figured out looking into this story is that cPanel and Plesk are apparently owned by the same company, and I think they're a private equity organization called Oakley Capital. So that feels a little bit monopolistic. What do you think?
It does. Well, cPanel itself is on 70 million, can be attributed to 70 million domains. That's a lot.
Well, yeah. So anyway, we'll see how this shakes out. But that happened, and it's definitely changed the cost structure for very small hosts. And if you're affected by that, either tweet Kathy or I and let us know what your thoughts are. We'd love to hear what you think. But you know, there's another story that's really interesting, and I actually, you know, Kathy, this caps on the .org domain pricing. The first I heard of that was Matt Mullenweg tweeting about it. He actually tweeted an article that I think Ars Technica used as a source, and the article was on reviewsignal.com. And they were basically accusing or making a case for regulatory capture, saying that ICANN has been the victim of regulatory capture. Now, what's happened here is with .org pricing, if you want to buy a .org domain, the pricing on those domains has been capped, and domain registrars, the place that you go to buy a domain, have they've not been able to charge more than a certain amount for .org domains, but they can charge more for their fees and so on. But competition between registrars has kept the price low. So what has happened is ICANN sought public comment on a new contract for the Public Interest Registry, which is the nonprofit organization that administers the .org top-level domain. 3,200 individuals and organizations submitted comments to ICANN. Most of the comments were regarding so there were multiple things they were going to do, and most of the comments were regarding the proposal to remove the cap on the price of .org domains. The existing 2013 contract capped the price at $8.25 per domain and allowed an annual price increase of no more than 10%. Registrars, as I mentioned, they can add their own fees on top of what they charge, but competition kept those down. There was a total of 3,252 comments that supported keeping the price cap, which you'd expect, right? I mean, most of the internet community is going to say, well, you know what, don't charge more for .orgs if possible, because there's a very small group of companies that benefits from that. 57 comments didn't express an opinion, and 6 supported higher prices. One of those 6 comments was filed by a former executive at VeriSign. Another was from a lobbying organization that counts VeriSign as a member. In other words, 98% of commenters opposed removing the price caps. And last Sunday, guess what happened? ICANN approved a new contract without a price cap. So they've removed the price caps on .org domains now.
Wow.
And like I said, the first time I saw this was Matt tweeting about this, and he was actually linking to an article. This is before ICANN confirmed that they were removing the price caps. And the blogger there, I forget his name for the moment, but let me just look that up, give credit where credit is due. And of course his name is right at the end of the post. Oh yeah, it's Kevin Ohashi, and Kevin is the founder at Review Signal. So Kevin did a very long blog post, and it's probably about 2,000 words, maybe a bit more than that. And he really kind of unpacks the entangled relationships around ICANN and who has influence at ICANN, and how ICANN has been the subject of regulatory capture. So regulatory capture is when a regulating agency that's created to act in the public interest instead advances the commercial or political concerns of special interest groups. Kevin makes a pretty good case for that being what has happened here. And the data very much supports this. 98% of people saying don't remove the price caps, and they go ahead and do it anyway, which obviously benefits the organizations that are selling .org domains. So ICANN's primary principles of operation have been described as helping preserve the operational stability of the internet, to promote competition, to achieve broad representation of the global internet community, and to develop policies appropriate to its mission through bottom-up consensus-based processes. Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is not a good development.
It's not.
I hope that more light is shone on this, and but it's kind of, the ship has now sailed. Caps on .org have been lifted. At the very least, I hope this brings more attention to ICANN and the possibility of regulatory capture having occurred over there. And perhaps the next time around we'll get something that represents the views of the internet community as a whole, rather than just a small number of companies that are trying to make an extra couple bucks off selling .org domains.
Yeah, and that affects so many different nonprofits. It's a difficult development for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sort of targets the companies you really don't want to target, many of whom are doing good in the world. But anyway, so moving on to Magento, I heard they had a security update, and it sounds like a pretty big one.
Yeah, 75 different critical security enhancements that affect Magento versions 232, 229, and 2.1.18. They are severe in nature. This was posted on July 5th on Magento.com. Magento is a shopping cart application that I know a lot of people in the web development world have Magento carts that they take care of, and this is a shopping cart application that's owned by Adobe. These 75 critical security enhancements have a number of different severe vulnerabilities, including unauthenticated remote code execution, meaning an attacker who doesn't have any authentication whatsoever to your site are able to get in and execute code, SQL injection vulnerabilities, file upload vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting, and they all had very high severity. So if you are running a Magento cart and you need to and you're running any of these versions, you need to make sure that those are updated. Magento, and we'll have a link on the site as well to the Magento security scan tool, which will help you determine whether or not the site that you're managing is affected. Interestingly, this afternoon, I noticed a post that was done on Friday on Bleeping Computer that stated that automated Mage Cart campaign was hitting over 960 breached stores. And there's scant details. They're still going over log files to determine what actually is going on. Sanguine Security and Willem de Groot, who I think we have seen some of his research in the past, are taking a look at this. But it's looking that several victims had missing patches against PHP object exception exploits, but they're still, again, reviewing all of the log files to determine how this JavaScript skimmer ended up on all of these sites. So watch for details on that. But if you are running any Magento, please do make sure that it's updated. And if you're running Magento, keep it away from your WordPress sites. Put it in a functionally isolated place, because in the site cleaning world, we saw a number of different applications, not just WordPress, thrown into a cPanel and running all under the same permissions. So if you have Magento site or application on a subdomain running in the same place as WordPress, it's a risk to WordPress, and that's why we're covering it. So, but we have another vulnerable plugin that our friends at GoDaddy Sakuri wrote about last week. Did you see that, Mark?
I did. And by the way, about that Magento thing, I was gonna say exactly what you said. If you have Magento and you're running it alongside WordPress, put it in a separate container. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly,
I mean, even if you're running any kind of commerce whatsoever, it's just like functional isolation. If commerce needs to just be in its own space, no matter what, even if just because you can throw it in a cPanel doesn't mean you should. Yeah,
and I think we've spoken before about avoiding running multi-site if you can. I know there's a lot of fans of WordPress multi-site out there, but that's another sort of all your eggs in one basket situation. But so this WordPress plugin vulnerability is an interesting one. So as you mentioned, this is from our friends at Sakuri. They published this research on their blog, and this is I've seen this before, and I wonder if it wasn't in an early version of Wordfence, although it might have been in someone else's product. But what happened here is that there's so the plugin is WordPress. The WP Statistics plugin, and they've patched a cross-site scripting flaw. And the way the XSS flaw is exploited is this plugin is logging visitor IP addresses, and when you visit a site using a proxy, when you visit a site and there's a firewall between you and the site has to somehow get your IP address. And so the way that happens is the firewall will send the site your IP address using an HTTP header, and often that HTTP header is x_4 or x-4. And so people like plugin developers will write a plugin that read that HTTP header, read the data in that header, which is an IP address, and get the true IP of the visitor to the site. If they don't use that header, they'll just get the IP address of the firewall, which is between the visitor and the site. So it's pretty common for software to read this data. It's really important that if you display that data to the end user, that you sanitize it. And I may have had some issues back in 2012 with a really early version of Wordfence where someone pointed out to me, hey, you better sanitize that. But don't quote me on that. So I might have fallen prey to this myself. But these guys fell for this hook, line, and sinker. And so basically they're not sanitizing the data in x_4 at all. They're displaying it to the end user, and of course in this case the end user is a site admin. So the site admin is viewing the IP address of the site visitor, and it allows an attacker to, instead of so the attacker can actually handcraft the data that goes into the x_4 header. and the attacker can put a malicious payload in there, and that can be JavaScript. And so ultimately that JavaScript is going to be displayed to the site owner. The site owner is logged in as admin. They're executing that malicious code as an admin, and it takes over the site. So, this is not a trivial vulnerability. It has the potential to do some very bad things. And versions prior to 12.6.7 are affected. So 12.6.7 of WP Statistics contains the fix. And my understanding is that this can only be exploited under certain conditions. So it's not sort of a default configuration that's affected, but definitely upgrade to 12.6.7 ASAP if you're using WP Statistics. And nice work from the security team.
Definitely.
And in other news, this company, a very popular video converter site, it's onlinevideoconverter.com. We're running an ad server, and so a lot of companies will run an ad server if they're serving a huge amount of page views. They want to embed an image in their page that's an ad, and they also want to track how many impressions the ad gets across all of their various websites and so on. So they'll host that image on an ad server, and onlinevideoconverter.com was doing that in this case. Well, their ad server got compromised, and it was serving a GIF image, and what the attackers did is they replaced that GIF image with malicious JavaScript code, and the browser, if you visited onlinevideoconverter.com, you would download that image. It would be executed as JavaScript in your browser, and then it would basically take you to a site, it would download the Green Flash Sundown exploit kit, which would then compromise your browser. And the kit used a Flash exploit, and if successful, executed a PowerShell command to compromise the victim machine. Now, this is significant because the site had or has over 200 million visitors per month. Maybe it's had at this point, but it's the 159th largest site in the world. So if you are running a high traffic site and you're using an ad server, even if that ad server is outside of your core infrastructure, it's only serving static images, which are ads, you definitely secure it, because this is a great example of an attack vector that can compromise visitors to your main site, even though a totally external server of yours has been compromised. Interesting little lesson there, Kathy?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, if it's under your control, and if it's being even if your site is pulling in ads from somebody else's server, it's still, to your customers, looks like your site and everything that's coming at them and the browser is coming from you. So it's really important to make sure that everything that's serving up assets to your customer sites are secure. For sure.
And then YouTube's had a bit of a policy change recently that's drawing the ire of the InfoSec community, Kathy?
Yeah, it looks like Cody Kinsey, who's a security researcher, and he has the Nullbyte channel, and he posts hacking videos. On Tuesday last week said that a video that he created for the 4th of July holiday to demonstrate how to launch fireworks over Wi-Fi, which sounds totally cool, couldn't be uploaded because of a rule against instructional hacking and phishing. The Register on July 3rd wrote about this, and they did a Wayback Machine archive and saw that this had been around since April 5th, 2019, so a relatively new rule. But another pen tester and hacker who runs a YouTube channel called DemSec said that he has had conversations with people at YouTube, and this was reported in the Register, that same article. And he's said that he saw many more people having issues where videos were being taken down, but that it seems to be a broad policy and applied sporadically without any clear delineation of what type of hacking videos can go on YouTube and what cannot. So it's nebulous, and it's causing some confusion, and that confusion is causing outrage, obviously, because that's what we do on the internet, right?
Especially Twitter, and where much of InfoSec hangs out. So
oh my gosh, exactly, yes.
If you want InfoSec outrage, definitely check out Twitter. But
definitely, hashtag InfoSec outrage. So yeah, so I think this is still developing, and I think just general hacking educational things are probably still okay, but again, it's going to get caught by algorithms. It's going to be caught by whatever rules YouTube has in place, and for a while it's just going to be. I don't think there's an outright ban from what I can tell, but it definitely just making people concerned.
For sure. So in other news, British Airways face a landmark $229 million fine, or 183 million pounds, for a data breach. And of course, they are presumably based in the UK. And they were hit with this fine due to a data breach last year, where I think it was 500,000 user records were breached last year, and of course they fall under the GDPR regulations of the EU. They haven't quite Brexited yet, so the airline is contesting this. But I think this really illustrates the risk of how important it is to protect user data, especially if you are in the EU jurisdiction. But we're seeing regulations similar to GDPR come into effect in the US. Or they will be coming into effect soon in states like California, for example. So I think we're going to see more of this kind of regulatory oversight and essentially punishment or punitive fines when we have these kind of data breaches. But this is got to be a tough one for them to stomach, Kathy?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting precedent, whatever happens with British Airways, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So the breach of the week, and I guess we have two, huh?
Yeah, we have two. I'm just going to group them together because it seems to be breach of the week is our new segment. So we have two. One was on June 28th, Bleeping Computer reported that an unsecured MongoDB instance belonging to a healthcare insurance marketing website was discovered on May 13th by a security researcher, and it had a number of personally identifiable information variables that was found in this database, but 239,000 records included insurance interest areas. For example, cancer insurance, life insurance, auto, medical, supplemental insurance, which kind of dances around the HIPAA concerns, but it's unclear how long this was exposed or whether or not malicious parties actually accessed it. Another breach that was reported by ZDNet on June 28th affected an Israeli IT firm called Unity. And this is a firm that provides data management, warehousing, and replication services for some large companies, including Ford, Netflix, and TD Bank. This breach affected AWS S3 buckets, or what we're calling leaky buckets now. The S3 buckets were found on May 13th and secured 3 days later, thanks to a data breach hunting firm UpGuard. But these buckets contained a lot of very sensitive information, including system passwords that people had been sending across email, but these emails had been backed up in OneDrive accounts to these S3 buckets. Project specifications, employee personal data, username and passwords for Netflix production databases were in there. So, I mean, it just kind of, to me, underscores, first of all, if anything's in a computer, assume that it has a possibility of being in a breach. So just because you think, oh, well, I'm just sending this email and I'll delete it later. Well, is the other person deleting it? And is that email going to end up backed up somewhere in a backup on an S3 bucket that isn't secured? You just never know. And so you have to treat all of this data by the class in which it should be secured. And a password or personally identifiable information needs to be treated in all ways as if it is, vulnerable, and it is. And we're seeing that, with our breach of the week. So it just keeps happening, doesn't it, Mark?
Yeah, and it will keep happening, unfortunately. But and then the last story we have here is really a bit of an instructional one for WordPress developers. This comes from the Ruby community, and there's I don't develop in Ruby, but I guess in Ruby you have gems, which are kind of like modules for development.
Yes.
And there was the irony here is really quite catastrophic, but the gem is called strong_password, and the developer of the strong password gem for Ruby lost control of their account, and someone logged in and modified the code, and they changed the code of strong passwords so that if you're a developer in Ruby and you've created some software and you're using that gem and you distribute your code, any website that is running your code, the compromised code would look for a specially crafted cookie. And if the cookie was present, the cookie could contain code that the compromised version of strong password would then execute, essentially giving the attacker full control of the site and allowing them to compromise the site. And so this is really an example of a supply chain attack where the developer, no criticism, well, a little bit of criticism to him, but I'm sure he's taken enough heat from the community.
Sure.
He didn't secure his account, lost control of it. The attacker got in there and did the worst possible thing that they could do, which is modify strong_password. Other developers try to use the module. Any code that they used it in had the potential to compromise websites. And so the lesson here really is a couple things. Developers, secure your accounts. Even if you're not maintaining the code anymore, it's your responsibility to secure the accounts that access that code to prevent an attacker from getting in there and releasing compromised code to the community. And by the way, that's my dog in the background groaning as he's sleeping, if you're wondering what that noise is. So that's the one lesson here. And then I think the other thing is this really illustrates the benefit of code signing. And this is something that the WordPress community is rapidly adopting, thanks to some work from some very passionate developers in our community. We now have code signing in WordPress core, which means that when they release a core version, the developers can sign the code using keys that they keep offline. And when we install that code, we verify that core code came from the core developers. If the infrastructure of WordPress is compromised, even if the attacker releases compromised core code, eventually, when this is fully implemented, WordPress will reject installing that code because the signature will fail. Now, it's the same thing with WordPress plugins. Ultimately, there's a project underway right now to incorporate this into WordPress plugins and themes, and it's the same. It works the same way. So in this case, if you take this example from the Ruby world, if a plugin developer's account is compromised, once code signing is implemented, even if the attacker releases malicious code, they won't be able to sign it because the developer will not have left his keys lying around. He'll have them offline, and the malicious, the threat actor will release the code, but it won't install because it's not signed correctly. So 2 lessons there: secure your accounts, and those who manage the sort of Ruby infrastructure, try to implement code signing if you can. And to the WordPress community, let's get more excited about code signing for plugins, because it's going to significantly improve our security posture overall. That's it for this week's news. A little bit of a busy week there. Hey, Kathy.
It was. Don't hackers take a holiday? Hey.
Apparently not. But yeah, good to be back in the States and recording on this side. So that's it for this week's episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe, and leave us a comment if you like. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we'd love to get a rating from you and let us know how we're doing. And as Kathy mentioned, if we get a rating, we might read it on air. And we'll be airing an interview, our next interview later this week, so stay tuned for that. Thanks, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.